True story, kind of a funny story, but my wife and I and kids were going on vacation. And, in planning for the vacation, we were using Expedia, which is super cool, just because of all the great content they have and all the things. I'm sure you guys use them. But we were sort of exploring the property we were going to stay at through Expedia, and visiting all the things like the activities in the restaurants and all the cool stuff we could do as a family. And one of the places I went and looked was, hey, while we're there, can we do a couple hour like couples massage and enjoy some relaxation there and those kinds of things? Well, about an hour after that, kind of playing around, seeing what was out there, I got an email from Expedia, and it was a very, very personalized email. It was like, hey, Todd, you guys are coming down. Super cool. We're happy to see you. Here's some really interesting offers for you that we think you might be interested in. And it was all the things that I just explored, right? And I was like, well, that's pretty cool. But now there's offers behind it and some incentives. And so, I was like, well, there's the couples massage. And it was like, a certain amount of money off. And I was like, well, yeah, I want that. Felt really cool about it. So, we pack up and we go down. We have a fairly uneventful trip, which is great. And we make it to the resort. And we're checking in and, checking all the, get all the paperwork and doing all those things. And I was like, well, I just want to verify, like, when are we going to do the couples massage and what is the date locked in and all that? And they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. We're like, oh, wow, man, that was so close to being like the perfectly seamless experience, right? It's like everything you dream of as a marketer. And I thought about it as related to this conversation and, how sort of personalized content and all of that, relates to, the commerce experience and all of that. I thought, man, they got it almost there. They had like a yard to go before they scored that touchdown, and then everything just fell through. And I just thought it was a really interesting way for us to start to maybe explore the conversation from a real life thing that happened. And, and it gets me thinking about all the different ways that they could have just made it just a little bit better, right? Just gotten across that finish line. So, it's just a kind of an interesting thing that just happened to me. So.
Well, it's interesting, Todd, because, everybody talks about personalization and it's so important and we have to do it. And then what a missed opportunity of taking it over that last mile, right? Like just taking it over that last mile. And like you said, you were so impressed up to that point. So did you ask them like why?
Oh, yeah.
Weren't up to date on that?
Yeah. It was a little hard because it was like an all-inclusive resort and they're like, hey, here's some champagne and all that. So it was really hard to be mad for a long time, but it was like a little bit of that's such a bummer because now we have to like go through and like register and make sure and hopefully we still get a massage and all that stuff. So good news, we did. But it was a little bit, they were just a little bit like, well, we don't quite work all the way there yet with all of our partners, and Expedia being one of them. And it was like, okay, I get it, I understand, but man, there's a lot of opportunities. And it's interesting because we have these conversations, almost every day, it seems like, with, marketing leaders and business leaders, and they are still struggling with the sort of like, we have all the pieces, but getting all those pieces together and having them, work the right way and those kinds of things still seems like there's a little bit of work to do in that area. So, we didn't take it too badly, but they didn't really have a great answer other than we're just not quite there yet.
So I think that's a good opportunity to even start talking about audience identification. How do you really think about your audience and your target and what do they want? And so, as we're thinking about that in the buying journey, and it's so there's so many things to think about, right? Because B2C is different than B2B and in some ways, but there are some similarities as well. So when you guys think about audience definition, what do you think about, Todd? Like, what are some of the things that are really important in that conversation?
Yeah. There's a lot of a lot of ways you can think about audiences, right? And so there's sort of like the maturity model of looking at audiences, and we have conversations sort of all over that model, right? So the very, very basic things of like demographics and, making sure that you understand who they are as people, where they live and, how much income and those types of things. But really understanding your audiences as it relates to creating a great customer experience, it really means diving deeper, right? And really starting to unlock that emotional insight and really, connecting empathetically with that audience, with that customer, and then sort of taking those collections of folks and segmenting and creating these audiences that are really, aligned behind personas and journeys and those kinds of things. And there are a lot of ways that you can slice and dice things, but I think if you cut to the core of like that emotional, that empathetic based approach, I think you really find true audiences that you can focus your attention on and understand what is impactful to them, what's valuable, et cetera. And then that sort of sets you up for success for all the other complicated things like we
Right.
just talked about of data and technology and how you leverage all of those things.
And I think that's true. And I think a lot, when I think about B2B, right? And some of the differences is that demographic data that you really think of in B2C and understanding because you're selling to that person is so different than when you're selling to a business, right? Because
Mhm.
they have a job to do. And for them, it's all about, I want to get in. This isn't the only thing I do on my day to day. This isn't the only thing I do on my job. I want to get in. I want to do what I need to do. I want to get out so I can move on to something else. So when you think about the difference, and like you said, every buying journey is different, but you don't have to overcomplicate it either, right? You can start
Mhm.
really small and start understanding your audience and then move into those more complex as you mature and want to get into actual, like, true personalization. And what does that mean? Like, one of the things I always tell people is, what is your definition of personalization?
Yeah, that's
Because it's
awesome. Yeah.
so different for so many people,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we
Yeah.
talk about that all
What
the
are some of the
time.
responses you get there, Karie?
It's all over the map, right? I've
Hmm.
had people like completely pause and say, well, personalization is personalization. And I'm like, no, it's not, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not. I have a great story for you, Todd. You started with the story, so
Hmm.
I'm going to tell
I
the
love
story
it.
now.
Yeah, great. I
I don't
love
want to
it.
be outdone, Todd. I have to tell the story too. But when I think about it, right? So we were working with a client recently, and they were traditional, very B2B business, right? And they had
Mhm.
done a lot of really good things. Like, they knew they didn't want to disrupt their existing B2B business, but they felt like that they had opportunity to go after markets that weren't currently being served without
Mhm.
that disruption, right? So they had really put in the thought about their what their goals were and what they were trying to accomplish and what they didn't want to do. But it was interesting because when we worked with them, we said, well, let's take a look at your personas, because, like, we have personas, we're in really good shape there. And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, so part of the engagement we did, we said, well, we'll look at your personas and give you feedback after we do all of these other activities, right? Just to give you some feedback on maybe the things that we learn. And so we did all of our work and we looked at their personas, and they had like 17 personas.
Wow.
And I'm
Yeah.
and I'm looking at it and I'm going, how do you really do a good job with 17 personas?
Mhm.
And so as we really started tearing these personas apart, and not in a negative way, just looking at them and thinking about them, we actually came back to them and said, the personas are great, right? I think your intent was good. You were really thinking about it right. But I think you missed one common factor that was consistent across all of those personas. And it was just this one piece that was basically, all of these people have this one thing in common, right? They're all trying to do the work themselves. So when you look at the personas, what really became important is that one point, not all of the personas. And when you think about it that way, it's like we could make this work so much easier because
Mhm.
now we can build personalization to a very specific need and really start understanding, like, what is it we're making these people who want to do this do that they don't want to do, right? How could we
Mhm.
make their experience better? How could we improve that, which then allows us to really start building more personalization and information and understand their empathy. And I think that's one of the things that people miss a lot is that empathy map,
Mhm.
that empathy piece, right? So often I go, what do we make people do that they don't want to do,
Yeah.
and then we make it so hard to do business with us?
Mhm.
I'm sure you
Yeah.
get into that a lot, Todd.
Yeah, we do, and I think one of the things that you said there was really around, like, once you were able to take, what did you say, 17? I mean, it sounds like a lot, but that's pretty common. But then once you found that single sort of insight that crossed all of them, that's when you were able to sort of unlock the magic, right? And say, okay, well, now we
Exactly.
can start to create really, really impactful content and all of the things that go into creating a successful journey and a seamless and short journey for these people. I'm guessing that really was the key that unlocked that for that
It
customer, right?
it really was. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it was fun even for them because it was kind of like that light bulb went off, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes we make things harder than it needs to be. right?
Hmm.
And but it's so easy to miss. But I think we were coming from the outside, so we
Hmm.
didn't have any preconceived notions. And they were so deep trying to do all these things right that I think sometimes you miss those things. So I think it's nice when you can work
Yeah.
with somebody who isn't as familiar with what you're
Hmm.
exactly trying to do to give that outside perspective as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. Yeah, I always see, the other sort of like barrier to sort of like seeing the forest through the trees is the amount of data that everybody has available now, and that makes it so hard, especially when you're working in personas and working about, you're thinking about how do I really connect with my customers. You have so much data about them. It's like, how do you really understand and analyze like what are the valuable pieces of information, right? And what are the data bits and bytes that I really need to focus on that deliver those insights versus sort of the noise of just having all the data. And I'm wondering, is that a part of the equation in the context of what you were just talking about?
Yeah, it actually was because
Hmm.
as we were really looking at, because they were looking at a new business model, and I think this is common, right? People are looking for new opportunities, new business models. How can we drive revenue, and do some things we've never done before, right? Because technology and digital just allows us to do that, reach new
Hmm.
audiences. The interesting thing is that what is the opportunity in your addressable market, right? Because when they really started looking at it, they were looking at a completely new market that they didn't really know much about, right?
Hmm.
And so it was really like, let's dig in and understand what is that total addressable market? What percent of
Hmm.
that market do you currently have share in? And what percentage of that market could you capture if you did the right things? And it was great. Like we unlocked this huge amount of potential that none of us really realized it was that big, and it was
Hmm.
phenomenal. And then we did some other work that was interesting, like looking at digital maturity of competitors. So not like
Yeah.
let's analyze the competitor, but let's look at how digitally mature they are, and what are
Hmm.
things they're doing that you should think about, right? And what are things that they're not doing that would put you in a really good position. And it was fascinating because some of the things we learned were like the competitors are using your own brand against you. You have such incredible brand recognition,
Yeah.
and these guys are using your brand recognition against you to sell non-branded things. And it was
Yeah.
like, that's pretty eye-opening, right? And so then you have the opportunity to start thinking differently and responding differently. So it was pretty fun and it was fascinating. And I think to
Hmm.
your point, one of the things they said when we were talking about looking at total addressable market is they had so much data available to them. Like they had all
Hmm.
the data they needed. And their response when we started looking at it was, oh, great, more data, right? Like I think the truth of the matter is that so many companies collect all of this data, but they don't know how to make that data useful or
Yeah.
actionable. And
Hmm.
I'm sure you have an opinion on that, Todd, but I'm sure you see that all the time.
All the time. Yeah. I mean, it is, and it's often, it's interesting because they have all, you have all the data and you've got all the technology, and, we see that, that's not stopping, right? There's tons of investment and people are still investing in the technology. They're investing in ways that they can leverage their data through tools and solutions and all those things that sort of connect to the technology. And that's all great. And those investments are very valuable. But the issue is like sort of like, now what do I do with it all? How do
Hmm.
I uncover that single source of truth? How do I make sure that the data is clean? And more importantly, is before we start looking at the data, have we really set out and said, hey, here's what we're looking for. We have some hypotheses that we want to go after, and in sort of mining that data and looking through it, and then sort of enabling the tools and solutions that you have to help you do that, right? Oftentimes it's like way back in junior high, right? Like you got to have a hypothesis for your science experiment to work.
Right.
That's the same sort of approach that often gets missed. And it's kind of interesting that it, like, if you just check that basic box of like stopping before you jump into your data and saying, hey, I wonder if what if we could find this, and you have a couple hypotheses, then it's interesting how many insights will start to come out of that data for you. And it really helps you keeps you on a path and unlocks that data for, those customer insights, which really then lead to loyalty and improved experiences and conversions. All of that comes if you have that way of unlocking those insights from the data. But it starts with really understanding, what am I going to look for? And it's funny how often that's missed, and I'm sure you see that too. But that's certainly a place where we see a lot of companies still struggle.
Well, and I think the reality is, right, so many companies, you know, digital's still new to them, right? Like
Hmm.
they've been running their business the same way for 50, 75, 100 years. And then you
Hmm.
add digital in, and so many companies start with digital going, well, it's a new channel. And we argue that all the time, right? There's differences between a channel, which I think of as a phone, a fax, an email, like
Hmm.
notifications. Like that's a channel. Digital is, especially when you add commerce in, is as big and impactful for businesses as their traditional sales channel, right?
Hmm.
It touches every single piece of your internal organization. And when you start talking about digital and then you talk about the fact that I want to become digitally obsessed, right?
Hmm.
Digitally customer obsessed,
Yeah.
organizations aren't modeled and they're not mature enough
Hmm.
necessarily to be able to really say, like, what does that look like? How do I do this? How do I start really thinking about this? And then how do I start breaking down my own internal barriers that prevent
Hmm.
me from doing the things that I need to do? And I think that's even with the data and personalization, right? You hear those words tossed out like randomly, constantly, right? So you
Hmm.
respond thinking that you have to do that, but some people don't even understand what it really means. And I
Hmm.
think the reality is you don't have to do anything, right? What you need to do is to step back and say, what is it that I really am trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
Do I have all of the information I need? And I always start with strategy, right? Like,
Hmm.
do I have the information I need to make informed decisions? If I want to drive revenue, do I really understand what my opportunity is, the size of the market? I have told people and probably get myself in trouble on a regular basis, but because I came from the client side, right? Like I spent
Hmm.
most of my career on that side. I always say to people, like, do you know what your share of market opportunity is? Do you know what?
Hmm.
Then they're like, no. And I'm like, well, if I was your CEO, I wouldn't give you a dime. Because
Hmm.
if you can't tell me there's billions of dollars or there's enough money there for me as a CEO to invest in this, then
Hmm.
why should I just keep throwing money at you, right? So, and I think that understanding, and so I really think about understanding who you're having your audience defined, understanding what you're trying to accomplish, really thinking about I understand my um my market, I understand what my competition is doing. Then you start going into, okay, now I really want to understand what's happening with my customers
Yeah.
or my prospects, right?
Yeah.
How do I understand what
Mhm.
they want? So I feel like there's just this kind of this flow that you go through, and businesses start at all kinds of different spots, right? And that's okay. But I think
Mhm.
eventually you get to a point where you're like, I need to start really thinking through this so that I'm
Yeah.
making the right decisions. Because I see people getting so excited about, I always call like the sexy things, right? Like
Mhm.
personalization, and they haven't even built a really solid foundation. And this is so common, right? I
Happens
don't
all the
even
time.
I
Yeah.
don't even know what I don't know. And
Mhm.
and you throw so much you risk throwing so much money out, and it's like you don't build a house on a bad foundation. So as we think about marketing and how all of that really ties together and where your organization is on their journey is just so important. And I'm sure
Mhm.
that you see this a lot from the marketing side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that maturity assessment is so critical because it is, and, everyone has the story of the CMO comes in and says, "Hey, we need to start doing next best action because I read it in a blog post or I read it
Right,
somewhere." Right?
right, right.
And it's like, okay, whoa, okay. First, we have to understand where you are and see if you're even able to do that, right? And what does that really mean for you? And is your data connected? And this is something that I mean, it's funny that even today you would think this isn't a thing where your customer data is all over the place. It's on people's desktops and spreadsheets. It's in your customer databases, but those don't talk to each other. It's all over the place, and it's still a real thing of like getting those things together. That is like step one, right? And then starting to have a plan. But to your point about starting with strategy, absolutely, it's a pulse on are you able to do this? What is the roadmap for you to be able to do this? And being real, right? Being
Right.
really honest with your customer, with and your clients, just saying like, wow, this is a great aspiration, but here's where we are, and here's what it's going to take to get to the next steps. I think those are some of the like more meaningful conversations you can have as you think about like not everybody's equal. There's some at the very, very beginning of their journey, and there's some that are out doing like so crazy advanced personalization like
Right.
Expedia. that you're like, wow, these guys, how much further can these guys go? Like, it's pretty amazing what they're doing already. So it's everything in between. We see it all the time, for sure.
But I think it's interesting when you think about your Expedia opportunity, right? Like that whole conversation you started this session with. Even companies that are super mature make mistakes, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they don't. This is still an evolving thing for everybody. Nobody, I mean, I do commerce assessments daily, right? And one of the things is even the most mature, especially in B2B, I'd say B2C
Mm-hmm.
is a little bit farther advanced in a lot of areas. But in B2B, even the companies that people benchmark against, when you really start digging into them, there's so many opportunities for them to get better. There's so many things that they're missing. And I feel like it's okay, right? Like that's not a bad
Mm-hmm.
thing. Because I tell people all the time, the one thing you don't want to do today is do nothing, right?
Yes.
You want to move forward with whatever you
Mhm.
can. And it's not a destination, right? This is like a journey. And if you
Mhm.
wait for your customer data as an example to be perfect, you're never going to get going, right?
Yeah.
And when
Yep.
you add customers growing by acquisition, you're never going to
Mhm.
have a perfect customer data model because you're going to change continuously. So I think it's important for companies to really think about the fact that it's what can I do? And then my
Yeah.
favorite line these days are, can I do it? Now should I do it? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. That
So
and that should question is an interesting one because you'll have a lot of opinions and a lot of direction. But I think when you sort of bring people together and have that conversation together, that's going to sort of breed alignment. And that alignment is where all of that stuff is going to start to be successful, right? Because you know how it is when everybody sort of has a different direction they want to go. But if you're able to sort of corral and say, hey, we're all going to go here and it's going to take time and but we have all the pieces we need and we just got to put them together, it makes a world of difference.
I agree, and I think there's just so much opportunity, and I think if anybody, people listening and engaging with this session, if they get anything out of this, right, it's really the fact that no matter where you are on your journey, no matter how mature you are or immature you are, there's so many things you can do to
Mhm.
move yourself forward, to build your confidence, to even start collecting the right data and focusing on like the right data. And then not only collecting it and understanding how to use it, make it actionable, right? Like how do
Mhm.
you take that data and truly make it actionable? And I think that I can't stress that enough, Todd. Like
Mhm.
I don't want anybody to waste money, right? And it's like if you understand what you're trying to accomplish, you can start putting together a plan that gets you in the right direction. And
Mhm.
it may take a long time, but that's okay because
Yeah.
this market is still evolving, right? Digital is still evolving. And as soon as you think you're there, it's going to have all changed anyway. So you're going to have to move forward with a whole different set of ideas and game plans and all of those things as well.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think like as we sort of started out, it's like if you're really looking at your audiences and really looking at like that empathy based, insight based sort of knowledge that you can identify in your customers and your audiences, that's like a big foundational building block. And then it's prioritizing, how you're going to look at your data, how you're going to measure it, and going in with hypotheses and then setting those goals ahead of time to your point and really that involvement of the stakeholders in setting those goals and sort of aligning. That involvement breeds alignment. I think that's such a huge and critical piece to this. And if you're able to sort of go down that path, I think it's not like I love that you said it. It's like it's not a sprint; it's a marathon kind of example, right? I mean, this is not something that's going to happen overnight, but it can happen as you start to methodically move forward on it. But you gotta make sure that you're hitting the big foundational building blocks along the way.
So much agree. Well, it
Mhm.
was great to be able to have a chat with you today, and I'm sure we'll have many more in the future.
Yeah, this is so much fun. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep, take care.